But also, too, for the model that does the posing for you, they're also going to want to, when they pose, they're going to want to hopefully do something that's worth you painting.
Well, I think that really depends on the model. The models that I tend to like the best are the ones who are very natural already, and they're very much, it's hard to explain, but they're in themselves. They seem to just have sort of a presence already, and that's what I find fascinating. And you have to remember, you know, when a person is sitting in front of me and I'm trying to draw or paint them, there isn't that much talking that happens usually. So the things that I'm picking up on are all body language and how they dress, and it's all very subtle, I think. Cynthia?
I was going to say, I think we're talking about two different things. I think if as an artist you're doing a portrait of a person, that's one thing. I think what you were talking about is an artist doing a painting of a woman or a man with a preconceived, you know, theme from the artist, and it's not a portrait of that person.
Possibly.
Because I've had my portrait done a couple of times, once or twice. The artist dressed me up, you know, and posed me. And that, as far as I was concerned, was the vision of the artist and had very little to do with me, except that I was the model. I was just being a model. I wasn't having my portrait painted. You know, and it's a whole entirely different thing, I think.
I think you're right. I think you've hit on something there. You know, I can only speak about what I'm interested in when I paint. The thing that's fascinating about art is that other artists will have a totally different idea of what the painting should be or what is interesting about a painting of a person. And that's a very good distinction to make.
Back to the discussion on, like the lady was saying earlier, about relating people and the nature. You know, there's some volcanic formations that, you know, sometimes look like people or animals and stuff. And, you know, there was the discussion earlier about like plants and animals, or pictures of plants and animals. Have you ever considered paintings from like volcanic formations and, you know, relating that to like the roughness of society and what we go through and our own humanity?
It's not really my direction, but it's a good one. Perhaps that's where you should be going.
Do you use the human figure in some of your sculpting? I know you've been doing some sculpting. You're not doing that anymore, are you?
No, but I did used to. My sculptures used to be pretty figurative.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about process and what I go through when I have a lovely model to paint from or draw from. Most often I work in a group where we have one model and a group of artists, and we kind of share the time with the model and share the cost. But there are times when I will just be there myself with the model. And it's nice to start with warm-ups. I'm a big lover of quick gesture drawings. I think, you know, 5 or 10 minutes of that where you're really moving your arm and you're breathing, it just helps you kind of rid yourself of the day and get your mind sort of on the task of art rather than all the bills that you have to pay or the dog that needs to be fed or whatever. And so for me, that's the time where I'm just breathing and developing that connection, that mind, body, and the hand-eye coordination, just developing that real strong connection. But I don't like to spend a lot of time warming up. Just a few quick little poses, and then I want the model to get into a comfortable pose. And in order for them to survive 3 hours, because that's a long time to sit still, I will mark them usually with masking tape so that after about 20 or 30 minutes they can take a break and we know where they were sitting and kind of how they were. So it's easier to get back into the pose. But you know, for me, what's exciting about the model versus the photograph is that even if they're holding as still as they possibly can, this is a living, breathing human being. They breathe, they blink, and they grow tired. And so there are these very subtle changes that occur that I have to deal with in the work. And I have to make adjustments. And I have to work fast. I mean, 3 hours, it might seem like a long time, but when you're painting a painting, it goes really fast. So I'm trying to record very quickly, and I'm not terribly persnickety about every little thing. I'm just trying to get it down. And for me, that's exciting. I really like that. There's like I said, two paintings here that were done entirely from photographs. And that was a recent thing for me. I wanted to try it to see, how is this different from working from a model? And what I discovered with the photographs is that I knew they weren't going anywhere and they weren't going to move. And I spent like 2 hours just doing the drawing. It took forever. I couldn't believe it. It was kind of painstaking, actually. I mean, I was erasing and redrawing, and I don't normally do that when the model is there. I mean, yes, I do want the drawing to be right, but I know that there's a time limit, and so, you know, it pushes me into maybe a faster way of working that's a little less tight, I guess I'm going to say that word. So I'm not going to tell you which two paintings those are. I'll let you try to figure that out. And maybe later I'll tell you if I feel like it. But for me, with the live model there, it's a collaboration. You know, they have to participate. They have to be interested in sitting still and projecting something, sharing something of themselves with me, which I appreciate. And I like that. And I hope that as a painter, maybe I have tools at my disposal that perhaps a photographer doesn't have. I want to convey emotion. I want to convey some kind of psychological state, and I can do that maybe with my mark making, or the colors I choose, or the way I blend the colors together. And I like to think that maybe that's my advantage over the camera. I don't really know. I'm not a photographer, and I know some photographers that do very beautiful portraits. So, John?
You were talking about the subtle differences between, you know, as the time goes on in that 3-hour time frame. I could imagine where the model sits down, the first half hour, they're kind of perky, or, you know, their energy level is up, and then as we get closer to that 3-hour window, you know, the things kind of, you know, probably settle down, and how do you adjust from that, from the beginning to, you know, the end kind of thing?
Well, I think that's a fairly intuitive process for me. I will say that the portrait I did of Shant, he's sitting right there, we started with a live session. It's over there. And as he was sitting there, I was taking photographs. So when he first sat down, I took a photograph. And then after maybe half an hour, I took a photograph. And then maybe after 2 hours, I took another photograph, so that when I got home with this partially completed painting, I had about a dozen photographs over a period of 3 hours. And what I did was I put them on my computer and I chose 6. And I printed them out, and I can assure you that all of those photographs were completely different. He was the same man, but these subtle changes going across his face made each photograph look so different. And I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I thought, well, you know, just try. And so I taped all those photographs to the top of my easel, and I used all 6 of them to complete the painting. And I would just kind of And I don't think I was choosing with any sort of rational reason. I was just kind of choosing which photograph I would pull from for each part of the painting. And it was really an interesting experience. It taught me a lot about sort of the difference between the moment of a photograph, it's like one moment, that's it. Whereas a painting, I mean, I don't think anybody could paint fast enough to capture that same kind of frozen moment. And that's interesting to me. I think for me it conveys a little more truth, you know, because life is all about change and motion. I don't know. I was also just going to talk a little bit about, I kind of got sidetracked about the process of starting the big painting and how I kind of approach that, because I know, again, that I have just this amount of time, and I want to be sure that I'm composing the figure on the page in the most interesting way. And so I make, on my sketch pad, I make little tiny rectangles, and I do really fast little one-line drawings. And maybe this one is the whole figure, and maybe this one is half the figure. Maybe this one, you know, one arm is out, and maybe this one arm is out on the other side. And then I pick the one I like best of those little quick thumbnails. And the one that I like best becomes the model for my big painting. And before I even touch the pencil to my big paper or my canvas, I seem to need to use my hands to figure out how I'm going to take this three-dimensional being and flatten them out on the page. So I actually will place one hand as the head and one to find the shoulders and the body, and I place it on the page that way. I can't really explain why I do that, but I find that that seems to help me get that idea of a three-dimensional thing onto a flat surface. And then I start the drawing, and then when the drawing feels good, I'll work on the paint or the charcoal or pastel, whatever. So that's sort of my process. Are there any other questions about them?
So you're
Phyllis?
saying you don't grid off the canvas at all?
No. No, that's way too meticulous for me. I'm pretty impatient, you know. I kind of want it. I mean, that's why I like to work from life, because it has to happen fast. And, you know, it's just, there's not enough time usually.